The autumn wind whipped across the empty highway as Officer Jake Daniels completed his third patrol of the night. At 42, he had seen enough in his 15 years on the force to know that the quiet hours between midnight and dawn often held the most surprises. His radio crackled with occasional dispatch calls from other sectors, but his stretch of Interstate 94 remained eerily silent. The digital clock on his dashboard read 2:47 a.m. when he spotted the sedan pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the darkness. Daniels had driven past this same spot 20 minutes earlier, and the car hadn't been there then. He slowed his cruiser and pulled in behind the vehicle, activating his emergency lights to warn any passing traffic. Through his windshield, he could see two figures in the front seat. The driver appeared to be a man in his 30s, hunched over the steering wheel. The passenger was a woman, roughly the same age, who seemed to be holding something in her hands. Neither had gotten out of the vehicle, which struck Daniels as odd. Most people with car trouble would be outside, checking under the hood, or walking around to assess the situation. Daniels grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of his cruiser. The cool night air carried the faint scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. His footsteps crunched on the gravel shoulder as he approached the driver's side window. The man inside rolled it down slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. "Evening, folks," Daniels said, keeping his tone friendly but professional. "Having some car trouble?" The man nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Yeah, officer. Engine overheated about 10 minutes ago. We called a tow truck, but they said it might be another hour or so." His voice carried a slight tremor, and he kept glancing at the woman beside him. Daniels studied the man's face in the beam of his flashlight. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool night air. His eyes darted nervously between the officer and the road ahead. The woman clutched a paper coffee cup with both hands, her knuckles white with tension. She hadn't spoken a word since Daniels approached. "Where are you folks headed this late?" Daniels asked, his instincts telling him something wasn't quite right. "Home," the man replied quickly. "We were visiting family in Milwaukee. A long drive back to Chicago." He gestured vaguely toward the highway ahead. The explanation seemed reasonable enough, but Daniels noticed the woman's grip tighten on her coffee cup. She stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact entirely. Her breathing appeared shallow and rapid, as if she were fighting to stay calm. "I'll need to see your license and registration," Daniels said, following standard procedure. The man fumbled in his jacket pocket and produced a wallet. His hand shook slightly as he extracted his driver's license. "The registration's in the glove box," he said, nodding towards the passenger side. The woman finally moved, reaching across to open the glove compartment. As she did, Daniels caught a glimpse of her face in the flashlight beam. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, as if she'd been crying recently. A small bruise was visible on her left wrist as she reached for the registration. "Thank you," Daniels said, examining the documents. Everything appeared to be in order. Michael Thompson, 34, Chicago address. The registration matched the vehicle, but the officer's gut instinct, honed by years of experience, continued to nag at him. "How long have you been sitting here?" he asked, returning the documents. "Like I said, about 10 minutes, Michael replied. "Maybe 15. Time kind of blurs when you're stuck on the side of the road, you know." Daniels nodded, but he remembered clearly that the car hadn't been there during his previous patrol. Either the man was lying about the timeline, or Daniels had somehow missed seeing them. Given the empty stretch of highway and his careful observation habits, the former seemed more likely. "Mind if I take a look under the hood?" Daniels asked. Michael's face flushed slightly. I wouldn't really know what to show you. I'm not much of a mechanic. The tow truck driver will figure it out when he gets here." The response was evasive, but not necessarily suspicious. Many people knew little about car engines. Still, Daniels decided to walk around the vehicle, conducting a visual inspection. The tires appeared to be in good condition. No obvious damage to the body. The trunk was securely closed, and the rear windshield was clean and uncracked. As he completed his circuit of the car, Daniels noticed that the woman had finally looked up. Their eyes met briefly before she quickly turned away. In that instant, he saw something that made his pulse quicken. Fear. Not the normal anxiety of being pulled over by police, but genuine, deep-seated terror. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, approaching the passenger window. She nodded mutely, still clutching her coffee cup. Up close, Daniels could see that her hands were trembling slightly. The bruise on her wrist was more pronounced than he'd initially noticed, and he spotted what might have been finger marks on her upper arm. "I'm going to need you both to step out of the vehicle," Daniels said, his tone becoming more authoritative. Michael's face went pale. "Is there a problem, officer? We're just waiting for the tow truck. We haven't done anything wrong." "Just routine," Daniels replied, his hand moving instinctively closer to his service weapon. "I need to conduct a safety check of the vehicle." The couple exchanged a quick, meaningful glance. In that moment, Daniels knew with certainty that something was very wrong. The woman's fear, the man's nervous behavior, the timeline discrepancy, it all pointed to a situation that required immediate attention. Michael slowly opened his door and stepped out, his movements careful and deliberate. The woman remained seated, seemingly frozen in place. Daniels noticed that she was wearing a thin jacket despite the cold night air, and her jeans appeared to be wrinkled, as if she'd been sitting in them for a long time. "Ma'am, I need you to step out as well," Daniels said, gently but firmly. She looked at Michael, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. With obvious reluctance, she opened her door and stood beside the car. The coffee cup fell from her hands, spilling its contents across the gravel shoulder. The liquid was cold, Daniels noted, suggesting it had been sitting for much longer than the 10 or 15 minutes Michael had claimed. "I'm going to search the vehicle," Daniels announced, pulling out his radio to call for backup. Something about the situation felt increasingly dangerous, and he wanted additional officers on scene before proceeding. "You can't do that without a warrant," Michael protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I have reasonable suspicion that a crime may have been committed," Daniels replied, reciting the legal standard he'd memorized years ago. "I'm authorized to conduct a safety search." As he waited for backup to arrive, Daniels kept the couple separated, positioning himself between them and the vehicle. The woman continued to avoid eye contact, while Michael grew increasingly agitated, pacing back and forth on the shoulder. "Look, officer," Michael said, his voice taking on a pleading tone, "we really haven't done anything wrong. We're just trying to get home. Can't you just let us wait for the tow truck?" Daniels didn't respond immediately. He was listening, using all his senses to gather information about the situation. The night was quiet except for the occasional passing vehicle and the gentle hum of his cruiser's engine. The woman's breathing had become more labored, and she seemed to be fighting back tears. Then, just as Daniels was about to call for an update on backup, he heard it. Faint at first, almost lost in the ambient noise of the highway, but unmistakable once he focused on it. A baby's cry. The sound was muffled, distant, but definitely coming from the vehicle. Daniels felt his blood run cold as he realized where the sound was originating. The trunk. "Open the trunk," he commanded, his hand moving to his service weapon. "Now." Michael's face went ashen. "I don't have the key," he stammered. It's broken. Has been for weeks." The woman let out a sob, her composure finally cracking completely. She sank to her knees on the gravel shoulder, her body shaking with barely contained emotion. Daniels drew his weapon, pointing it at Michael while reaching for his radio with his free hand. "This is Unit 47, requesting immediate backup and EMS to mile marker 127 on eastbound Denai 94. Possible child endangerment situation." The baby's cry grew louder, more desperate. Daniels could hear the infant's distress even through the metal of the trunk, and every parental instinct he possessed screamed at him to act immediately. "Step away from the vehicle," he ordered the couple, his voice taking on a hard edge. "Both of you, hands visible, move to the front of my cruiser." Michael raised his hands slowly, his face a mask of resignation. The woman continued to sob, but she complied with the order, stumbling toward the police car on unsteady legs. Daniels holstered his weapon and ran to his cruiser, grabbing the emergency crowbar from his trunk. The baby's cries were becoming more frantic, and he could hear the exhaustion in the tiny voice. How long had the child been trapped in there? The crowbar slid into the gap between the trunk lid and the car body. Daniels applied steady pressure, feeling the metal give way. The lock mechanism snapped with a sharp crack, and the trunk popped open. Inside, wrapped in a thin, stained blanket, lay a baby girl. She appeared to be perhaps 3 or 4 months old, her face red and swollen from crying. Her tiny fists waved frantically in the air as she wailed with the desperation of a child who had been alone and terrified for far too long. Daniels holstered his weapon and carefully lifted the infant from the trunk. She was lighter than he expected, and her diaper was soaked. A half-empty bottle of formula rolled around the trunk space, along with a crumpled note written in shaky handwriting. "Take care of her, please. I can't anymore." The officer held the baby against his chest, feeling her tiny heart racing with fear and exhaustion. Her cries began to subside as she felt the warmth of human contact, but her breathing remained rapid and shallow. "It's okay, sweetheart," Daniels whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "You're safe now. I've got you." Backup arrived within minutes, their red and blue lights painting the highway shoulder in alternating colors. 2 additional patrol cars pulled up, followed closely by an ambulance. The paramedics took the baby from Daniels, conducting a quick assessment while preparing to transport her to the nearest hospital. Michael and the woman were immediately arrested, their hands cuffed behind their backs as they were placed in separate patrol cars. Neither would provide any information about where the baby had come from or how long she'd been in the trunk. "She's dehydrated and scared, but otherwise appears to be okay," the lead paramedic reported to Daniels. "We're taking her to Children's Hospital for a full evaluation." Daniels nodded, watching as the ambulance pulled away with its precious cargo. The baby's cries had stopped completely now, replaced by the exhausted whimpers of a child who had been through too much. As the other officers processed the scene and prepared to transport the suspects, Daniel stood alone on the highway shoulder. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and the sobering realization of what might have happened if he hadn't heard that cry. The investigation would later reveal that the baby had been in the trunk for nearly 2 hours. The couple had been driving aimlessly, trying to decide what to do with the infant they'd found abandoned outside a convenience store. Too scared to contact authorities immediately, they'd made the terrible decision to hide the child while they figured out their next move. But in that moment, as dawn approached and the highway began to see its first commuters of the day, Daniels felt only gratitude. Gratitude for the instincts that had made him stop. Gratitude for the silence that had allowed him to hear the baby's cry. And most of all, gratitude that he'd been in the right place at the right time to save a life. At Children's Hospital, the baby was cleaned, fed, and examined by a team of pediatricians. Despite her ordeal, she was remarkably healthy. The social workers who took over her case would eventually find her a loving foster family, and later, adoptive parents who would give her the life she deserved. Officer Daniels visited the hospital that morning, still wearing his uniform from the night shift. He found the baby sleeping peacefully in the pediatric ward, her tiny fingers curled around a soft stuffed animal that one of the nurses had given her. "She's going to be fine, Dr. Martinez," the attending pediatrician told him. "A few more hours in that trunk, and the outcome might have been very different. You saved her life." Daniel stood at the baby's bedside, watching her chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over the sleeping child. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of the city waking up. Traffic, construction, the normal rhythms of life continuing. "That sound saved your life," he whispered to the sleeping infant, his voice filled with wonder at the chain of events that had brought them together. As he prepared to leave the hospital and head home to his own family, Daniels reflected on the night's events. In 15 years of police work, he'd responded to countless calls, written hundreds of reports, and made thousands of routine traffic stops. But this one would stay with him forever. The baby stirred slightly in her sleep, a small smile crossing her lips as if she were dreaming of better days ahead. Daniel smiled too, knowing that sometimes, in the darkest moments, the smallest sounds can make the biggest difference. He walked out of the hospital into the bright morning sun, his faith in humanity restored by the knowledge that he'd been able to answer a cry for help when it mattered most. The highway would be busy now with the morning commute, but somewhere in the city, a baby girl was safe and sound, ready to begin her life anew. The case would make headlines in the local papers. "Officers quick thinking saves abandoned baby." But for Daniels, the real story was simpler and more profound. It was about listening, about trusting instincts, and about the sacred responsibility that comes with wearing the badge. As he drove home through the morning traffic, Daniels couldn't shake the image of the baby's peaceful face. In a job that often showed him the worst of humanity, this night had reminded him why he'd chosen to serve and protect. Sometimes, all it takes is being in the right place at the right time and having the courage to act when duty calls. The baby would grow up never knowing the officer who saved her life. But somewhere out there, she would have the chance to laugh, to learn, to love, and to make her own mark on the world. And that, Daniels knew, made everything worthwhile. The highway stretched ahead, empty and peaceful in the morning light, holding no trace of the drama that had unfolded there just hours before. But in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by the night's events, the memory would live on. A reminder that heroes come in many forms, and sometimes the most important victories are the ones that happen in the quiet moments when no one else is watching. Officer Jake Daniels pulled into his driveway as the sun climbed higher in the sky, ready to go home to his own family with a renewed appreciation for the precious gift of life and the responsibility we all share to protect the most vulnerable among us. The night had ended, but the story of a baby's rescue would echo through time, a testament to the power of human compassion and the importance of never giving up hope.